Her name was Captain Gwen Thackeray, known among the Char as Gwen the Goremonger. This is her story. Gwen's tale begins in the year 1070 AE, during the time that the Searing struck Ascalon. On that day, many Ascalonians lost their lives, including Gwen's entire family. Thousands fled before the Char invaded. However, the young Gwen stayed, desperately searching the wreckage for anyone to help her. Alas, her search came to an abrupt end when she was discovered and taken by the Char. In some small way, it was a blessing that Gwen was only 10 years old, as the Char did not kill the young humans. Instead, they forced them into slavery, where they were lashed constantly by their taskmasters as they went about their strenuous chores. Many of the children, however, were not strong enough to make it to the end of a day, as their frail bodies buckled under the strain and were slaughtered in front of the others as a warning. With each barbaric extermination, Gwen's rage grew until it crystallized into a hardened form of hatred for the Char she would call her masters. 7 long years passed before Gwen was presented with an opportunity to escape. Without a moment's hesitation, she fled into the wilderness. Alas, her vain attempt was short-lived, as she was quickly recaptured and thrown into a jail cell. For this act of disobedience, the Char claimed she served no further use to them and sentenced her to death. Gwen should have been slaughtered on the spot. However, the Char decided that she may yet serve a purpose as entertainment, and placed Gwen into an arena that was specifically built within the military camps to play off unarmed humans against wild beasts. The Char would cheer at the sight of a human's disembowelment and inevitable death. Now it was Gwen's turn to face off with a gigantic devourer. Using cunning and guile and against all odds, Gwen was victorious, and in the ensuing fluster of the Char's shock, she was presented with another opportunity to escape. She fled into an underground labyrinth which lay beneath northern Ascalon. It was not long before she discovered the bodies of those before her, entombed within by the Char. It was within this very tomb that she discovered the works of researchers who had long since perished in the arenas for the Char's entertainment. These fabled writs became the very key to her salvation, the powers of the mesmer. Eventually finding her way out of the tombs, somehow stronger for the ordeal, Gwen found herself back in the wilderness, but this time she knew where she needed to go, for in the distance lay a menagerie of mountains which held the promise of freedom from the warband of Char that were hot on her trail. Knowing that a slow and painful death would be waiting for her should she be caught again, her only option was to make it to the mountains. Finally stumbling up the mountain path, having eluded the Char, Gwen collapsed before a group of free Ascalonian soldiers. It appeared that her prayers had been answered. These soldiers called themselves the Ebon Vanguard, led by Captain Langmar. Soon thereafter, Gwen joined the Ebon Vanguard and served as a strong presence within their ranks. However, the years of labour, torment, anguish and punishment had turned this once innocent child into a ruthless, vengeful woman. Deep within the far Shiver Peaks, the Ebon Vanguard stumbled across an abandoned tower which proved useful in becoming their base of operation. Within a few moments of exploring, they discovered a hall of monuments with a scrying pool lying in the centre, which they realised could be a weapon to use against their enemies and must be protected. They named this tower the Eye of the North. Shortly after liberating this tower of unknown origin, Captain Langmar and her soldiers set out on a mission to go behind enemy lines within the Char homelands, leaving Gwen in command of the Ebon Vanguard. However, after a substantial length of absence from Captain Langmar, Gwen began to fear for the worst, and so prepared the troops to go in after them. At that moment, a dwarf and an Azuran arrived at the gates of the tower seeking refuge from a horde of monsters that they had encountered called the Destroyers. Gwen invited them inside to the Hall of Monuments for some privacy. Strangely, the scrying pool appeared to react to the strangers and showed them a vision. Gazing into the pool, Gwen witnessed a fiery cavern filled with hostile monsters inside. Unsure of what she was seeing, the dwarf introduced himself as Ogden's Stone Healer and explained that both himself and Vec the Azuran had encountered the destroyers shortly before they arrived at the Eye of the North. Ogden went on to explain that the destroyers had overwhelmed the Dwarven and Azuran tunnels in the south and presumed that they were heading towards the Eye of the North. Gwen needed to find Captain Langmar and her troops now more than ever to defend the Eye of the North from the destroyers. Ogden stated that he would travel to Olafstead to seek assistance from the Norn, and Vec would head for Ratasum to find and recruit the smartest of the Azuran. Therefore, they each went their separate ways. Gwen's first priority was to find the missing vanguard, and so took a small party into the Char homelands in search of them. She soon discovered their camp, but it had been burnt to the ground by the Char. Only Captain Langmar's helmet remained. However, it was pointed out that there were only a few bodies in the area, but Captain Langmar's party was a small army of around 40. Gwen calmed her fury, hoping to discover survivors of the ambush, and vowed to go after them and slay any Char that dare get in her way. Gwen and her team slashed through multiple Char scouting parties and were eventually led back to their camp close by. But there was no sign of the Ebon Vanguard, although Gwen did find someone that claimed they knew their location. Unfortunately, that someone was an imprisoned Char. Unable to control her anger and hatred towards the Char, Gwen used her magic to attack the beast through the bars of its cell. The Char did not seem to fear death, and taunted her profusely.
You are a brave little mouse. Unlock the door and see how brave you are.
Just shut up and die!
Kill me, and you'll never see your friends alive.
Gwen interrogated the prisoner and asked why she should trust a Char no better than any of the rest. But this Char was different. He swore an oath against his kind and claimed they had captured his warband along with the Ebon Vanguard and marked them all for death. The Char bargained in return for releasing him, he would go and free his warband and then show Gwen where the Char shamans were keeping her allies. Reluctantly, Gwen agreed, but swore that if he were to try anything, she would personally gut him. The prisoner understood the terms and introduced himself as Pyre Fierceshot. To ensure Pyre would not double-cross her, Gwen travelled with him deeper into the Char homelands and into the depths of the Doomlaw Shrine. There, he would find his warband and free them, along with the assistance of Gwen. Although uneasy being around Char without killing them, Gwen knew she merely had to wait just a little while longer to see if Pyre and his warband would be true to their word. After much toil within the depths of the shrine, and many dead Char later, Pyre emerges with his warband, along with a fresh Char prisoner. Pyre probed him for the location of the missing Ebon Vanguard, using Gwen as a threat, in that he would allow her to destroy him if he did not talk. The Char was quick to divulge that the Ebon Vanguard were being held in the Saknoth Valley and were to be given as a blood sacrifice to feed their new gods, the Destroyers. With this information, Pyre fired a single arrow into his victim and silenced the interrogation for good. True to his word, Pyre led Gwen to the Char fort in the Saknoth Valley and showed her the defences. He also explained where the Ebon Vanguard were being held. Within moments, Pyre concocted a plan to break in through the front gate, using the Char's own siege devourers against them. Amazingly, the plan worked, thanks to Pyre's warband showing up to reinforce the front line and control the siege devourers, while Gwen and Pyre stormed in through the front gate. Cutting down all the Char in their path, they reached the Char Hierophant just as he released a troop of destroyers. It was a tough battle, but once again Pyre's warband followed up the rear and assisted in slaying the destroyers and the remaining Char. Just as Pyre had promised, the Ebon Vanguard along with Captain Langmar were all accounted for within. Upon freeing her allies, Gwen paid her tribute to Pyre.
So, the little mouse comes to apologize.
One good act does not redeem your people, murderer. I want you to know, I do not like you. I do not forgive you. But most of all, I do not fear you. I hate you. There's a difference.
And with that, Gwen returned back to the Eye of the North with her comrades. Back at the Hall of Monuments, it was not long before Ogden and Vec returned. Accompanying them was Jorah the Norn and a human named Livia, claiming they had recruited many allies in the fight against the Destroyers, from the Dwarves, Azuran and Norn alike. It was at this time that Pyre Fearshot entered the chamber, and also offered to assist in the fight along with his warband. Although Gwen was most uncomfortable with his presence, and indeed that of any Char, she knew that they would need all the help they could obtain if they were to defeat the Destroyers. Once again, the scrying pool presented them with a vision, this time of a great destroyer. They now knew that they must find this monster and put an end to it once and for all. Fortunately, Vec knew the location of this vision and called it the Central Transfer Chamber. The group agreed to rally their troops and congregate inside the Central Transfer Chamber. However, Ogden claimed he had one more job to do with his dwarven brethren and left for the heart of the Shiver Peaks, promising he would be there with the dwarves when the time came. At last the troops were gathered and all marched towards the Central Transfer Chamber. However, the resistance from the Destroyers was great, and many allies were lost in the battle. The chamber itself was swarming with powerful Destroyers.
The Great Dwarf's power is upon you all.
Those who undergo the rite are changed both in body and mind.
The Great Dwarf's power is upon you all. Hurrah! We are all the Great Dwarf now!
But thanks to the dwarves that had now transformed into stone warriors, they were victorious and cleared out the chamber. King Jalis Ironhammer of the dwarves, no longer being of rational mind, was prepared to defend the Central Transfer Chamber for as long as he needed. However, the initial battle entering the chamber had resulted in many deaths, and it would only be a matter of time before the dwarves fell. Vec suggested he left his golems with the dwarves to give them a stronger defense. It was at this time that Gwen suggested that the Great Destroyer was the one controlling the others, and surmised if they were to defeat it, the other destroyers would also be defeated. Therefore, Gwen, Vec, Ogden, Jorah and Livia made their way further into the caverns to face off with the Great Destroyer itself. The battle was tough and many of the team were injured, but nonetheless they were victorious. Gwen was correct. With the death of the Great Destroyer, the others lost their coordination and the dwarves pursued the remaining destroyers into the depths of the earth. Thereafter, Gwen and her newfound friends, including that of Pyre Fearshot, returned to the Eye of the North, if only for a short time to celebrate their victory. The following Winter's Day, Gwen sat alone within the Hall of Monuments, avoiding the festivities, for in her heart she missed her family deeply and spent her time remembering them. However, the Lieutenant Kieran Thackeray had taken a shining to Gwen and wished to do something to lift her mood. So he took a sketch of Gwen's family crest and visited a Norn by the name of Valgar Tempestcrafter and asked that he craft it into a magical pendant. Being an old friend of Kieran, Valgar obliged. Kieran returned to Gwen and presented the gift to her with a friendly smile. Gwen glared at the pendant and became flush with rage. "This is my family crest. What gives you the right to do this?" Kieran couldn't quite understand her anger and quickly tried to calm her. He explained that the pendant not only represented her past, but also her future, for the Ebon Vanguard were her family as well. She pondered on the sentiment for a moment, before graciously accepting the gift, and finally noticing the lieutenant and his apparent admiration for her. Following Winter's Day, Gwen was given full command of the Ebon Vanguard, as Captain Langmar was called to Kryta to assist in the Civil War, along with the Lieutenant Kieran Thackeray, who was the leader of a sub-faction of the Vanguard called the Ebon Falcons. After a time of lost communication with Kieran, she began to worry, until one fateful night a soldier returned to the Eye of the North and presented Gwen with one of Kieran's arrowheads. Knowing something was wrong, Gwen stormed out of the tower and led a search for Kieran and Captain Langmar. Upon reaching Lion's Arch, Gwen was presented with the heart-wrenching news that Captain Langmar had perished at the hand of the Massat while on a mission to escort Livia and two Azuran to the new Ascalonian settlement. Along the journey, Gwen discovered many clues to Kieran's location and eventually found him, albeit battered and bruised, but alive. They returned to the Eye of the North together, and Kieran finally plucked up the courage to propose to Gwen, asking her to be his wife. All the heroes that Gwen had ever met were invited to the wedding, including that of Pyre Fearshot and his warband. And although the warband did not show, Pyre did. Vec, Ogden, Livia, Jorah, and even friends from Cantha and Ilona were there. It was a wonderful day, and the exchange of vows between the couple gave Gwen all she needed to let go of the hatred within her heart. In 1080 AE, King Adalbern recalled the Ebon Vanguard back to Ascalon and commanded them to travel to the mountains between Ascalon and the Crystal Desert and build a stronghold for the future of the Ebonhawk. On the journey, many perished at the hands of hostile Char, but they finally made it to an old abandoned mining town and began to rebuild. It was at this time that King Adalbern sealed Ascalon's fate within the Foefire. Thankfully, the Ebonhawk was just out of reach, leaving the remaining settlers of the Ebonhawk the sole survivors of the old kingdom of Ascalon. The Ebonhawk continued to build while fending off attacking Char for many years. This fortress became Gwen's new home and would be the place where she and Kieran would begin their family, becoming the home of their children and their children's children, and some 250 years later, the home of their great-grandson, Captain Logan Thackeray. It is not certain the exact date of Gwen and Kieran's deaths, but one would like to believe they both lived long and fruitful lives, and possibly passed away together between 1130 AE and 1140 AE. Many of these heroes rest in peace, and live on forever in stories and in our hearts. The